Okay, team. This is Naveen Nanjundappa, and welcome to this program. Today, I'm going to talk about the Burndown Chart, the Burnup Chart, in depth, and probably burst most of the myths that the team members and the management have with respect to this graphical representation. Let's start with a quiz for you all. Here is a chart for you. I would like you to look at these charts and then keep a number. Which of the following chart represents a good team? There are 6 charts, and which chart represents a good team? I hope you have made your choice and also the reason why the team is good. Now, here is a situation. Let's assume that you are a manager who's supposed to give a bonus to the team, and you have 2 teams to select. Of the two, here is the 2 teams Burndown chart. Let's assume based on this, you need to select the team which is good and give them the extra bonus. Among the team 1 and team 2, which one of this would you select and why? Which team deserves the bonus and why? The last one, I would like to share one of the experiences. In one of the coaching assignments, the management was making a complaint that my team does not update the Burndown chart frequently, and the Burndown chart is not good. And here is a sample of the Burndown chart that they were showing me. What was my response to them and what was the outcome? I'm going to share this experience with you. So, all set for today's session on Burndown charts. Let's get started with the fundamentals. I hope everybody would have heard of the Burndown chart when it comes to the Agile or a Scrum framework and a Scrum project. Even though the Scrum does not recommend or does not say that the Burndown charts are mandate, somehow this has become a default to that if you have to claim yourself to be working in so-called agile project, you better have a Burndown chart representing, and there is a lot of myths associated with it. So let's start with understanding the basics and where does all this come from. The Burndown chart is a graphical representation of an information. Let me ask you this. How many of you have a home loan? And if you have a home loan and you are paying the EMI every month, at any given point of time, what would you like to know? Of course, you would like to know the total amount of pending money. That means how much EMI is pending for you to repay. Exactly. So when you look at the information, how much is pending, and you want to put this information, how much is pending at any given point of time, into a graphical representation, that's a Burndown chart for you. So the template of a Burndown chart is a very simple one. It's an x-axis, y-axis. Over a period of time, you start talking about basically what you want to know, how much is pending. Example, if you want to know how much home loan is pending, then this becomes the home loan Burndown chart. If you want to know how many runs for a cricket team is pending to win the match, it becomes a runs pending runs Burndown graph. So obviously we are talking about at any given point of time how much is pending. So this is a graphical way of representing the information. How do you represent the graphical way? Simple. At any given point of time, it talks about how much is spending. And now, this graphical representation is the simplest way to look at the trend and simplest way to understand what is the current situation. Is that true? Does it tell you everything that you want to know about? Let's look at it in detail. If you want to know how much is spending for your EMI, the EMI Burndown chart is going to look exactly like this. But does it tell you, one, how many loans do you have? No. Does it tell you how many of these loans have how much of money pending? In each EMI? No. Does it tell you how much you are paying for each of the EMI? No. Which means this is just a graphical representation saying that at this point of time, let's say this is 2 lakh rupee pending. At this point of time, you have 1 lakh rupee pending. So it only tells you that you have an outstanding of 1 lakh. It does not tell you whether you have 1 loan or 3 loans. So this is a total accumulated loan amount that you have to pay. Now let's come to office. There's a lot of myths around this Burndown chart, even though the Burndown chart is basically a tool and a technique. So the tool and the techniques should make your job easier, faster, better, and simpler in order to inspect and adapt. So let's look at the first question that we were looking at. Which of the following Burndown chart represents a good team? I'm sure many of the people would have picked up all the charts, one or the other. If you think that you have a choice, please do put it uh, on the chat window. I'm sure the 1 and the 3 is looking good. That's what we are getting. Let's get deeper into this. First of all, before we answer this question, which of the graph is good, let's go back one step and try to understand the Burndown chart itself in detail. Now, Burndown chart basically has 2 axes, of course. On one axis, you have the time, and the other axis, you have to tell us what you want to know, how much is spending. So that's a pending graph. In fact, if this graph is drawn for a period of a sprint, if this graph is for a period of a sprint, then this is called as the sprint Burndown chart. And let's put it up this way. On the x-axis, if you want to know how many tasks are pending at any given point of time, in that case, this represents the task information. So it is sprint Burndown chart for tasks pending. I could also have the task hours. I could also have the story points, the product backlog items. It does not matter. So I could say story points, product backlog items, ... anything. In fact, now let us look at this graph. I am sure you would have already jumped into making a conclusion. Graph 1 is good, graph 4 is good, or whatever. If you have made any choice, anything, by virtue of knowing the fundamental thoughts around burn down chart, burn down means pending. So all these graphs are representing something pending at a given point of time. With that formula, every graph has touched the zero axis, which means by definition, there is nothing pending. Now, when there is nothing pending, how did you make a decision that this graph is good, that graph is good? I am sure you would be looking at the dotted line that is present. We will come to the dotted line soon. But now, let's look at this. You will not be able to say which graph is good just by looking at the shape of the graph. So the shape of the graph does not tell you which team or which graph is good. In fact, all graphs are good because all graphs are telling you that the team has done their work. And at any given point of time, the graph is showing how much of the y-axis was pending. Of course, if you now start having a y-axis plotted, let me just put this as y-axis as case 1. Let's assume that these are the product backlog items or the user story pending. Product backlog items or user stories. Product backlog item or user stories pending. Now, does your answer change? If I say these graphs are the tasks, hours pending, so task, hours pending, does your answers change? In fact, you cannot just talk about the shape of the graph and then say this graph is good, that graph is good, because what it represents on a y-axis is also equally important. Irrespectively, if you have chosen graph 3, this is something that your team is fooling you. Yeah. And the next one, if you think that this graph represents that team is not planning well, think again. And if you think this graph, while the team is adding new things and hence it's not good, think again. If you think that this graph has no update, so no update, think again. If you think the team members are not updating no updates regularly or frequently, think again. And if you are thinking, oh yeah, of all the things, the graph 4 looks a lot more realistic and this is a better graph, think again. Let's get into the discussion. The first thing is the graph y-axis talks about the pending work. So let's look at each one of this and get deeper. Let's talk about the first one. And that is, if I have the Burndown chart, and I'm going to call this as a sprint Burndown chart. So automatically you should know that the duration is going to be the sprint and its frequency of update could be any time there is an update to the graph or the amount of work pending. And now, if this happens to be, your, let's say, product backlog items pending, y-axis is product backlog items pending, and the x-axis is the sprint. Think about it. This graph is predominantly talking about pending work. So on the day one of your sprint planning meeting, let's assume your team has planned for 8 product backlog items. So what is the graph going to represent? 8 product backlog items are pending. The first day of the sprint is done. The team is still working on it. Did they finish any of the 8 product backlog items? No. So the graph would look still 8 pending. Let's go to the next one. The second day, the team members continue to work in a sprint and they are still working on the product backlog item. How much is 100% complete? 0. So what does the graph talk about? 8 pending. On the third day, the team members finish one product backlog item 100% as per their definition of done. Now, how much is pending? 7. And that is where on the 7th day, you will have, on the third day, you will have 7 pending. And then the team members continue to work, 7 pending. By the time it is the next working day, they finish 2 product backlog items. So it's going to be 5 pending. And then if you have the next few days where the team's still working on 5, and then you get 3 pending. So at any given point of time, if I ask the team at this point of time, how many product backlog items are pending, it shows that there are 3 product backlog items pending. That's all you're going to get. As I told you, you will not get to know what exactly is pending, which product backlog item is pending, and how much of the product backlog item is pending. It just says it is pending. Is that what you're looking at? And by the last day of the sprint, if they finish, it touches the x-axis, it shows that 0 items are pending. Is the team good? They planned for 8, they finished 8. Is the team doing well? Yeah, but then there are some myths around this. What is that? There are some people who have a misunderstanding of this dotted line. What is this dotted line? Most often people think the dotted line is ideal line. Of course, a lot of tools represent this as an ideal line. A lot of people talk about this as an ideal line. Ideal line? Think about it. What ideal thing is it talking about? It's absolute nonsense. In fact, many people call this ideal line forecasted, estimated, planned. In fact, all these are wrong answers. This is not an ideal line. This is a graph theory from class 8. And the dotted line joining the x1, y1 dot position and x2, y2 position is called a slope. So this is a slope, and slope is a ratio. It's an average. You should understand that the team which represents their data above the graph does not mean they are lagging behind their plan. Let me put it down for people who have misunderstood this. This portion, when the team is here, let me write it down this, does not mean team is lagging behind. Why? Because this is a slope, and slope is drawn for 2 points, point 1 and point 2. And if at all you have to compare, and if at all you want to know, is your team doing good? The first thing is you cannot compare the absolute number and the shape of the graph with the slope information. Let me give you an example. If you're from a cricket background or a cricket, you watch cricket score, then you will be able to understand this better. Let's put this graph for a cricket team. I have the number of overs and I have the number of runs pending to win the match. Let's assume that the team has 250 runs to score and they have 50 overs match. Right at the point of 0th over, you will get to know that the run rate, what is run rate? The run rate that is required is nothing but 250 divided by 50. So let's put this as, to make it a little more interesting, let me make it as 255 runs to hit in 50 overs. How much is it going to be? It is going to be a little more than 5. So 5.01 runs per over. Okay. Now, the graph, the dotted line, if you measure the slope, then the slope represents your average. Interesting. The slope represents the average. That means it's a ratio. But then at any given point of time, the team member cannot hit 5.01 runs. So how many runs the team members are going to score? They're going to score 5 runs. So it is going to be here. The number of runs pending is 250. The next number of runs is going to be, say, 245. The next one is going to be 230, which means if at all you want to know if my team is doing good, you need to basically draw, listen carefully, you need to basically draw the slope and compare the slope. How do you know your cricket team is able to win the match? You're going to say, this is our required run rate and my current run rate is going to be this point and this point, the slope joining. So at this point, the team point 1 and point 2, this was the slope. The second point, this was the slope. The third point, this is the slope. As long as the team members are getting the slope very close to the slope line at any given point of time, the team is doing good. So just because the dots are above the dotted line does not mean the team is behind. And at the same way, if it is behind, it does not mean they are lagging behind their plan. So please stop using and referring to the dotted line. It is more of misleading than helping the teams and the management. Let's look at the next case. I hope you're finding it interesting. If so, please do put it on the comment and also post your questions so that I can answer them. Let's go to the next one. The next one is, so you understood at any given point of time, it is pending and it has got nothing to do with the dotted line. Dotted line is not an ideal forecasted, estimated or planned. Which means if you were happy pointing out the third one, saying that my team is showing me the graph which is almost ideal, They are fooling you. This is like a team saying, we need to score 5.61 runs per over, and we are exactly scoring 5.61 runs every over. Can a team score 5.61 runs every over? No. They can either score 5 or a 6, but the average can be a ratio in decimal points. Interesting. So this was the product backlog item spending. It is the same story if I put this as story points. So if I put this as a story point, only after the product backlog is item is completed, so many story points will be updated. If not, then the story points will remain the same. You don't just deduct the story points. And first of all, don't be fooled. Remember, one story point is not equal to 8 hours or 4 hours. And I have already uploaded a video which clearly talks about what is the relationship between the story point and the estimated time hours and how to use the story point. So if the product backlog item is pending, the story points, the size associated with the story point would also not be completed on a day-to-day basis. So it will still remain the same. You cannot demand your team to update the story points on a daily basis. If your team has an 8-story point, you cannot say you need to update 3 story points today and the remaining 5 tomorrow. It is either 0 or the full 8. It is nothing in between. By the way, 8-story point is a big story. Better keep it at 1 or 2. Okay, so let's look at the next one. The next one is a situation where the manager in one of the organization showed me this graph and then said, hey team, hey Naveen, my team does not update the sprint Burndown chart and you need to coach them. I looked at this Burndown chart. The first thing that you have to notice is the y-axis is story points, and story points is associated with the size of a product backlog item. You say that the number of story points is completed only when the product backlog item is completed. I looked at this graph and it's absolutely fine. The first thing that you have to notice is the team has completed everything that they have planned for because it is stretching the x-axis. The second one is the y-axis talks about the story point and the story points pending at any given point of time. Of course, the story point pending at any given point of time is not going to be a smooth curve. It is going to be stagnant for a couple of days, and when the story is completed, it is going to show you the burn down. I made a comment to this manager that it is not the team that needs a coaching. In fact, you need a coaching to understand the Burndown chart. And the bigger problem is this dotted line. And he always kept saying, my team is always lagging in their plan, and only during the last days, they'll somehow finish the work. Sorry, the team is not somehow finishing the work. The graph is showing how much is spending at any given point of time. Now let's look at the next one. I'm sure you will come back to this and then ask more questions. Please keep posting your questions. Now, let's look at this. I asked you if these are the two graphs of two teams, Team A and Team B, and you are supposed to give a bonus to one of the teams, which team would you give for? Post your answers on the comments and you will be surprised. If you have chosen Team A because they have planned for 400 task hours of work and then gradually finished it, while the team has only planned for half, and that planning is also not so good because they've added some new things during the sprint and it is showing up in the graph. Yes, think again. You cannot judge between the two because case number one, in this team, in this team, on the day one of the sprint, day one of the sprint, the team members have pulled, let's assume there are 5 items, 5 product backlog items into the sprint, and the total tasks were created, all the tasks were created, and the estimation estimation was done for all the tasks and updated on the tool. So on the first day, you have 400 hours of pending work. Okay, let's go to the team two. In team two, on day one, the team has set the sprint goal. They have identified the goal, and based on the goal, they have identified 5 product backlog items, but planned. When I say planned, created a tasks and task estimations for only 2 stories, two product backlog items, and that two product backlog items happen to be 200 hours of work, and that is what was posted up. As the team started working, they finished almost close to the verge of finishing both the product backlog items 100%. After finishing, after done, they planned for remaining 3 product backlog items, and that is why their new task represented the current pending work. Meaning, just look at this in terms of these home loan burn down charts. You have 200 rupee as your loan, and gradually you started paying back. When the loan amount became close to say 2 rupee, you were confident of picking up one more loan, and that is what you did. You took another loan and your outstanding loan amount went back to 200, and then slowly you paid back the amount. Now, the person who took 400 and repaid it versus the person who took 200, repaid, took another 200 and then repaid, which of these two is good? Both are good. And this is where a lot of misunderstanding comes up when people don't understand the sprint burn down chart is always representing the pending information. It is just a pending information. So think over. By the way, thanks for all the people who are watching live. If you really like this, don't forget to subscribe and also share this. Let it reach your team members, managers, and people who have misunderstood the graphs, especially misleading to a lot of stress in the team. Like and share this video, and you can also reshare this so that people can watch it. Thanks for subscribing. Let's go ahead. So it is not right to say that team 1 is good or team A is correct and team B is correct. Both are good, and you cannot just blindly look at the graph and say team 1 is good, team 2 is good, unless you know the strategy used by the team during the sprint. If I were a manager, even before I decide anything on the graph, I would look at what is the mindset, what is the strategy used by the team. And based on the strategy the teams are using, we would look at how the teams can make the best use of the graphs. So you understood that the graph is going to be strategic based. Here, the team strategy is to plan for everything. Here, the team strategy is to plan just sufficient, just in time. And if you're confused, isn't this improper planning? Isn't this team under planning? The answer is no. Scrum talks about the team has to set a goal. So during the sprint, you set the goal. So the sprint goal is fixed, and that gives you a sense of direction in which you have to move, the objective to move on. While the sprint backlog is the plan, and this can be changed. And updated. If you're not convinced, I would invite you to go ahead, read the Scrum guide. Under the product backlog, under the sprint backlog, you will clearly see that the sprint backlog is a plan and is the plan that the teams create during the sprint, and it can be changed or updated anytime the team finds out some new information. Not just that, during the daily Scrum, if the team requires to change the plan, they can just go ahead and change the plan as well. Adding new task, removing the task that is planned, updating this estimate of a task that is already planned, and also replanning the product backlog items with new information. All these are valid, and that is what is the core essence of agility during the sprint. It does not mean the team is doing a bad planning. If that is the case, then where is all these confusions coming from? Unfortunately, these confusions are coming from those people who have not understood the graphs correctly, what the graph represents. I hope now you have got a good idea of what this graph represents and how do you read them, understand them. But still, this has not solved our big problem. What is the problem? It only tells us what is spending. It is only telling us how much is spending, not what exactly is spending. It only tells you the number, but not exactly what is spending. So for all those teams, especially the management, who are looking at the graphs and asking the team members, send us your burn-down chart at the end of the sprint, please note that this burn-down chart, let's say sprint burn-down chart, sprint burn-down chart is used and useful for the team while they are inspecting and adapting during the sprint. This graph has no meaning after your sprint is done, and especially for the senior management. If at all you are so much of interested, please join the retrospective meeting and look at the sprint burn down charts and see what information the sprint burn down chart gives you. What is the hidden pattern that could help the team? In fact, most of the times, the burn down chart is just representing how much is spending. So the sprint burn down chart is inspect and adapt tool / technique. And it is inspecting, adapting because it tells you how much is pending at any given point of time. Now the point is this: if you know how much is spending at any given point of time, is it possible for you to inspect and adapt? So can you inspect and adapt based on how much is spending? Let me give you an example. You have 1 lakh loan pending. Can you tell me what you can inspect and adapt on? No, it's very difficult. So in order for the team to inspect and adapt, looking at the sprint burn down chart, they need additional information and additional support. What are those? They would need either a task board or information on what exactly is pending. What is exactly pending? What is to do? So usually the team members, if they are using the sprint burn down chart, they have to use the task burn down the task board or the information radiators, which contains what is pending along with this chart. So don't look at it in isolation. Super. I hope this helps you a lot in understanding the sprint burn down chart. Now let's go ahead and try to understand the next one. If this graph, all the things remains the same, if this graph is drawn for a release, then this becomes release burn down chart. So the terminologies where you use sprint burn down chart or a release burn down chart, the sprint or a release indicates your x-axis. What is it representing? So a release burn down chart indicates how much is spending for a given release, and sprint burn down chart indicates how much is remaining for a sprint. And in both cases, you can have whatever you want to know how much is spending. Do not go with the graphs in isolation. And if you don't believe that burn down chart has got nothing to do with Scrum, Burndown chart is a graphical representation. It's a graph. So how much is spending expressed in terms of graph. Nothing to do with Scrum. You can work beautifully in Scrum without drawing the Burndown chart, the sprint Burndown chart. What could you do? You could use a good information radiator which talks about what is spending, how much of it is spending, and then go on. Let's look at the next one. In phase, if you want to know how much money you have put in the bank and how much the bank is giving you an interest, at any given point of time, you want to know how much money is accumulated. When you talk about the information, which is how much is accumulated so far. So let's look at it. If you want to know how much is added or accumulated, so far or till now, the graph that talks about how much is accumulated is called as Burnup chart. And as always, if this happens to be a sprint, then this is the sprint Burnup chart. If this happens to be a release, it becomes a release Burnup chart. So basically, it is talking about how much is accumulated for a sprint, how much is accumulated for a release, and you need to tell what you want to know how much is accumulated. So if you want to know how much loan is accumulated, then its y-axis is a loan amount or the interest amount. Okay. Now here is a very interesting stuff. If only our commentators in cricket started using this example, think about it. When the team is batting first, they are setting a score, they are accumulating. So batting first, you don't know the target. So the graph, I'm sure you would have seen over a period of number of overs, the teams start scoring runs. So the graph is going to look like this. So this graph is going to be going up. Now, at any given point of time, you will know how much is added. And here, since we are talking about the runs, how many runs are added? How many runs are accumulated? So obviously, what graph are we talking about here? This is burn up. Let's look at the case number 2, when the team is chasing a score or batting second. When the team is batting second, you have the same overs, but then because they are chasing a score, they have a target of 256 runs to win. They're going to win when they hit all the 256 runs. So you can decide, do I need to draw a graph as how much runs is accumulated? Example, that this is what you will start seeing. The team 2 runs accumulated, and when they hit the 256 runs, they win. Or you can see a graph like this: 250 missed running, 220, 200, 150, and when it touches the zero, they win the match. And this graph is burned down. Which means, did you notice when I have a target, I can use a burn down chart, and when I don't have a target, I can use a burn up chart, basically looking at how much is accumulated. But this is both a graphical way of representing, and you can just go ahead and use them. All the information remains the same. Do not go with the dotted lines. Burn down chart is pending, burn up chart is accumulated, and you tell us what is pending, what is accumulated. Meanwhile, I would like to tell you, if you give me 6 sprint burn down charts, 6 consecutive burn down charts, of your team, in fact, with my experience, I can predict what is their past and what is their behavior. The burn down charts, especially for a sprint, is like a horoscope of a team. It embeds the hidden patterns, hidden behaviors. If you want to do it, please feel free to send me your team's 6 consecutive sprints burn down charts, and we can have a conversation. Please avoid looking at sprints burn down chart, the sprint burn up chart, with the thought process that the line graph should be always sloping and reaching the graph downwards. On the dotted line, above the dotted line is bad, below the dotted line is good. All these are misleading information. I hope you got sufficient information. If you still have a lot of questions, you can always contact us on the email, and you can visit our website as well. Meanwhile, I do a lot of sessions, especially with the Scrum Master and the Product Owner sessions, in which we go in depth with the mindset required for the teams to look at the sprints. If you are interested, you can, if you're interested, please go ahead and register for the program wherein you can have all the information related to the Scrum, the product ownership, and a lot of interesting thought process behind this. Thank you so much. I hope it was worthwhile for you all this time learning about the Scrum, especially not telling you to use the burn down charts, and it is a tool and a technique. Thank you so much. looking after for our next session. Till then, take care.